My name is Katlyn Thomas. I am a lawyer from the United States, and I was also the person in charge of legal affairs for a UN peacekeeping mission in Western Sahara called Minurson.
So, can you shortly describe your experience, because you were responsible of organizing, or the Minurson is responsible for organizing the referendum. How did this process go?
Well, as you may know, in 1991, the United Nations was able to persuade Morocco and the Polisario to end a 16-year war and to settle the issue of who should have sovereignty over Western Sahara by means of a referendum. The way this was organized was called the settlement plan. And under the terms of the settlement plan, there would be a ceasefire, and the persons who were from Western Sahara, considered the people of Western Sahara, would vote on whether to be part of Morocco or to become an independent state. According to the terms of the settlement plan, the people who would be eligible to vote in this referendum would include all the people who are on a census that was conducted by the Spanish when the territory was a Spanish colony back in 1974. With certain modifications to take off the list people who had died and to add to the list some people who had come of age as of that date and some other minor adjustments. But basically it would be the people who were on the Spanish census list. So on the basis of this settlement plan, there was a ceasefire that went into effect in September of 1991, and a UN peacekeeping mission called Minurson was formed. I was part of that mission, and in 1994 I went to Western Sahara to help organize the mission. One of my first tasks was to negotiate with the parties the terms of reference for the referendum, including the eligibility criteria for voting in the referendum. Now, as I just mentioned, when the parties agreed to a ceasefire and the settlement plan, it was understood that the people who would vote in the referendum would be only people on this list conducted by the Spanish in a census back in 1974. However, immediately after the ceasefire went into effect, Morocco lobbied to have these criteria expanded. And what Morocco proposed was that the criteria be that anyone who could prove that he was member of a Saharan tribe, and a Saharan tribe was defined as any tribe who had at least one member on the Spanish census of 1974. Anyone who could prove that he was a member of a Saharan tribe and who could meet one of 5 different criteria would be eligible to vote in the referendum. Now, these criteria included not only the people who are on the Spanish census, but people who are relatives of the people on the Spanish census, people who can prove that their father was born in the territory, and people who met some sort of a residency requirement prior to 1974. For a while, the Polisario didn't want to accept these expanded criteria because they believed that this would be an open invitation to fraud on the part of Morocco. But eventually, in 1974, the Polisario agreed. And it was on the basis of these expanded eligibility criteria that we started interviewing potential applicants for the referendum. Now, from the very beginning, this referendum process was not organized the way it should have been. Instead of having people have the opportunity to come to our headquarters and to file an application to vote in the referendum, we were not allowed to get applications from individuals. Instead, all the applications had to come from one of the 2 parties, which meant that in the Moroccan-controlled area of Western Sahara, all the applications we got from people to participate in the referendum came through the Moroccan officials. The same thing is true on the Polisario side. In fact, on the Moroccan side, the Moroccan government positioned sentries around our headquarters to make sure that no one would be able to come in to file any applications. In addition, on the Moroccan-controlled side of the Western Sahara, we were not permitted to have any contact with the Sahrawis or potential applicants unless there was a Moroccan official present. And not only that, we were not able to distribute any information about what the referendum was about or why we were there, or what the criteria were for eligibility, or any information whatsoever to the people. All the information had to be funneled through the Moroccan officials. This was not the case on the Polisario side. At Tindouf, in the refugee camps, we were allowed free access to anyone, to talk to anyone at any time about what we were doing. So, from the very start, the process for the referendum was not organized in a way that I thought it should have been. But we did proceed according to our best ability to interview applicants to participate in this referendum. Now, when the expanded criteria were agreed, the people in Minurson thought that we would probably get an extra 20,000, 30,000 applicants who would say that they were eligible under one or more of the expanded criteria. Instead, we got roughly 120,000 applications from Morocco. We knew very well that many of these people could not possibly be eligible under the expanded criteria because of the demographics of the area. They couldn't possibly have been in Western Sahara or had roots in Western Sahara because it was so limited in population. Nevertheless, we went through interview sessions with every single one of these applicants. Now, the interview sessions themselves had problems. The way it was organized, there would be an applicant in a room with a commission member, and there would be observers from both of the parties and the African Union, and then there would be tribal elders who would help us determine whether the person was really eligible or not. And one of the tribal elders would be appointed by Morocco, and the other one would be appointed by the Polisario. During the process, on several occasions, we had a Moroccan appointed elder come to us and either ask for asylum or tell us that we shouldn't pay any attention to what he was doing because he was being forced to testify falsely by the Moroccan officials. We also had information that the Moroccans were coaching people on how to appear to be Sahrawis when they weren't actually Sahrawis. So there were a lot of problems going on during the interview sessions, and at one point during the process it came to a complete halt, and complaints were sent back to the United Nations, and complaints were made through the U.S. Congress, and the U.S. Congress cut off the funding for this mission, whereupon an investigation commenced by the Security Council, and the process did not resume until James Baker was appointed as special envoy or representative of the Secretary General back in 1997. When he was appointed, he resumed the process, and in 1999, a provisional list of people eligible to vote was published. Now, the Identification Commission decided to reject more than half of the applicants put forth by Morocco. And when Morocco saw that these applicants had been rejected, the first thing Morocco did is they tried to use the appeals process to get them put back on the voters list. But they also, at the same time, requested that the evidentiary requirements for eligibility be loosened. Now, James Baker refused to do that. And when Morocco found out that this would be the case and that they would stand little chance of getting these rejected applicants back on the voters list, they simply pulled out of the process entirely. And from that point forward, the United Nations, instead of requesting that Morocco adhere to its commitment to have a referendum under the terms that were agreed, the UN simply said, well, let's look for another way forward, and started a series of negotiations between the parties that commenced in 2007 and has lasted to this day without any concrete results. During this period of time, the Moroccan position was and has been that they would be willing to allow the people to form an autonomous region within the Moroccan state, but they would be against any kind of proposal, referendum or otherwise, that might possibly lead to the independence of the territory. On the other hand, for the Polisario, they are adamantly against any solution that would not leave the option of independence on the table. So because the positions of the parties are so diametrically opposed, nothing has happened during this period of time with direct negotiations, and I do not foresee any chance that anything is going to happen in the future. So that's where we stand today. Now the question is, where do we go from here? I don't believe that direct negotiations are going to lead anywhere. And I think the only solution forward would be to have a referendum. Now, I know that some people have said, particularly the Moroccan government, that there are reasons why there cannot be a referendum, either technical reasons or because of inability to agree on eligibility criteria or some other reason. But as I have mentioned in this discussion, there were no disagreements about the eligibility criteria. By the time the voters list was published in 1999, any problems and disagreements about the eligibility criteria had been overcome. So there weren't any obstacles in terms of disagreement over the eligibility criteria for this particular referendum. And as far as technical issues are concerned, there were no technical issues that would have prohibited a referendum from taking place. In fact, in my view, there was absolutely no reason why a referendum could not have taken place in 2003. And therefore, I think that there's no reason why a referendum cannot be organized to take place in the future. And there's no alternative, really, to having a referendum to determine the wishes of the people. Because, in my view, there are no good reasons under international law or international policy or ethics why the Sahrawis should be forced to accept the one option that has been made available to them by Morocco. They should be allowed to determine for themselves whether they want to be part of the Moroccan state or want to be independent. In fact, this is a requirement under international law called the right to self-determination that they are entitled to under international law. And since there's no reason why they shouldn't be allowed this right, I can't see any other way forward other than having a referendum in the future.
Well, maybe one question here. How would you review how the UN has handled the Western Saharan conflict or the decolonization process of Western Sahara? Your personal view of how would you review the UN process?
Well, I have mentioned that it was organized badly from the beginning. And I think that that has to be laid at the feet of the United Nations hierarchy officials. It wasn't Minurson. It wasn't my office. It wasn't the legal department of Minurson who decided to organize things that way. It was the higher-ups at the United Nations. And I think that the only reason that they were doing that is to try to soft pedal problems that they would have with Morocco. And in fact, later on, after I left the mission, I had the opportunity to speak with some higher-up officials of the United Nations when I was with a delegation of the American Bar Association. And the head of peacekeeping at that time, when I asked him why it was that the reports of the Secretary General didn't really tell accurately what was going on in the mission, I expected that he was going to deny that, but he didn't. He said, no, we were afraid that if we told the truth, Morocco would pull out of the process. So if you have a United Nations who is so afraid of having one of the parties pull out of a process that it's afraid to organize something in a fair and equitable manner, then I think you have a problem. And that's the way it was in the past. I hope that if there's a referendum in the future, it will be done in a more fair and equitable manner by the United Nations. And I think if the African Union and the various states who are interested in this issue, who are members of the United Nations, put their foot down and insisted that there be a fair process, then the United Nations would have no alternative but to comply.